A cicada. Oh my gosh. Thanks, Megan. You got me again.
Did you introduce your roach?
That's a cicada. Undercover.
Oh, here's mine.
You have one?
Oh, yeah.
That's a real
I
one.
got one too.
Let's see.
Hold on. Andrew.
Okay.
A real roach.
Well, we are streaming. So when Andre gets back with his cicada, then we'll introduce the cicada. Everybody, welcome to Insight Policing live stream Uncut. We're already closing out May, which is amazing. And today, so I'm Dr. Megan Price. I run the Center for Applied Insight Conflict Resolution, and I'm the founder and trainer and one of the trainers of Insight Policing, which is conflict communication skills, conflict resolution for law enforcement. And we're joined today by Andre Brooks and Mike Delaney. So you're all familiar with these two, and we're going to learn a little bit more about them today. So Mike and Andre each have 30 years of experience or more in the policing world, and the bulk of that has been in investigations. And throughout this program and in other ways, you know, they've talked a lot about how communication and building relationships have been key to success in the profession. So they came up through the 90s, the 2000s, like some really dangerous times, at least in the DC area. I grew up here too, so I remember those days. And they've talked a lot about, you know, how communication matters. So today it would be great to hear some of your stories around, you know, how communication, relationship building, integrating that into your skill set as officers really made a difference on the job and, you know, in the communities.
Cool.
Who wants to start?
Go ahead, Mike. I'll let you go first.
I was going to let the real vet go. So, hey, again, guys, Mike Delaney here. Like Megan said, almost 30 years of law enforcement experience here. Also an instructor with Insight Policing. As far as communication, Megan, you and I are working on an article now about communicating and developing sources, confidential sources, and just establishing a relationship with the community. That was big. And I know early on in the police academy, they kind of programmed you to, you know, be real hands-on, and it's your way or the highway. If you didn't listen, you get arrested. You know, and that kind of carried on into the street for a little bit until I kind of found my way out there to, you know, I was able to communicate and learn my own way. And I tell you, it's really, we were successful doing that. I worked with Andre from the very beginning when I was cut loose back in 1995 when I graduated the academy. And I mean, I followed, you know, I watched him work and communicate and even talk to the guys on the street, you know, the drug boys on the street. You establish rapport. It was a different kind of rapport, but you got things done. And it was very important because once you get that respect, you establish that respect with the community, you know, you get things done. And that was what really propelled me into an investigative role. So I went in kind of early as an investigator, but I'll let Andre give a little background on his patrol experience as well.
Can I just ask you a quick question before you jump in, Andre? So what was it like to kind of move from the hands-on learning of the academy to the real world skill set that you built? And I guess what I'm wondering about is, was it intimidating to walk up to community members, to walk up to the guys in the corner or whoever and strike up conversations? What was that like? Can you kind of paint a picture?
Yeah, I won't say intimidating. It was really against the way we were trained. Like I said before, I was not mincing words here. We were trained to, it was our way or the highway back in, you know, the early 90s. And that's what it was. And a lot of times you see that on the street as you come out. But again, as I started to develop my own style and communicate, it was just going against what the norm was. And to be honest, if you try to communicate first in front of certain officers, they would look at you as being weak and like, what are you doing? We don't do things that way. So, but once you're cut loose and you have to establish your own identity and your own way of thinking, it kind of it keeps you safe. You actually have people in the community looking out for you. So it definitely it changed my career, and it was for the good. I tell you that it was, like I said, it wasn't difficult. It was just a different way of thinking, and I wish we would learn that early on. So.
Yeah, I can reiterate that also, Mike. What we're seeing today is that lack of communication. Coming up in those 90s and 2000s in this area, when you come out the academy, you're given to a field training officer, like Mike said, and then you're put out into a beat, into an area. We worked the Hyattsville area for many years, along Kenilworth Avenue, and bordering Route 1 and Riverdale, Hyattsville, all of those parts over there. And we had we not only had the structure of trying to police the way they wanted us to police, but we had the barriers of different languages and different people that we had to come up against, and you had to learn how to communicate with those people also. I mean, we had a heavy Hispanic population in that area. We also had Africans, Jamaicans. So you came up against a gamut of people, and you had to kind of learn how to adapt and communicate with all these people that you're interacting with. And when you're assigned to a beat, you need to get to learn who these people are, because like Mike said, a lot of these people ultimately will befriend you, even though a lot of people in the community don't like what you're doing sometimes. But the majority of people in that community know that you're there to make their quality of life better. So communication was the key, and it wasn't always done in such a way that was appropriate to other members on your squad. But once you get out there and you develop your style and you develop your relationships with the community and the people you police in that community, that communication is just like second nature. I mean, it's you can hop out the car on a street corner full of guys. Some may know you, some may not. Your approach, your tactics, your approach will determine that outcome from the whole thing. I mean, we had drug dealers, we knew what they were doing, but you kind of set a precedence when you're in your beat through communication. And that's how, we were able to develop Mike's great confidential sources. He loved that, which we did. We developed a great deal of confidential sources out there that helped us close a lot of cases. And I'll be the first to tell you, sometimes one drug dealer will tell another drug dealer just to get them out of the street. I can remember a case that me and Mike had, and where a 70-year-old lady was killed up on Fairmount Heights, and we were both incensed about it. And this lady was stabbed over 38 times in her house, and she had a daughter who was pretty much invalid. She was invalid, and she would feed the homeless guys that would come by and do work for her. But needless to say, our communication skills are so great, and I don't know if you want to call them some kind of bravado, machismo, but we went over to the local drug spot, which is called the Ebony Inn off the Sheriff Road, and we basically gathered all the drug dealers around, and we said, listen here, we know what's going on here, but nobody's going to eat. Basically, no drugs are going to be sold up along Eastern Avenue and Sheriff Road until somebody comes up with our suspect in that case. And it ended up, somebody came up, gave us the information we need to close that case. But we really put a damper on the drug trade out there, just through communication and through letting these people know, listen, I mean, we're gonna be real about it here. We know what's going on out here, but I tell you what, if you want to make your money, we're gonna trade off something here, and that's that kind of positive, negative, positive communication. However, what you want to look at it, but it was successful in closing a murder case, and we have multiple cases like that where we have gone into neighborhoods that are along the DC border and deep inside the Beltway, where we had to use our communication and our personal skills to just talk to people in the community to get the information we want. So it's vital. It's vital to policing. It's a skill that needs to be tuned and brought back. So these younger officers will be able to deal with some of these people in the community effectively.
Mhm.
And let me add to that real quick, Megan. So, and this is why this insight policing, the training is so important, because I would say back when Andre and I were, working with a larger police department, we would, even as investigators, we would train in firearms and tactical training. I would say maybe 70% of the time was our training, 70% of our training was focused on that. And I'm guessing on that. And our communication skills, I mean, we would get what, 10 to 15% training? And that's then. So now this is why insight policing is so important right now, because you have to be able to communicate. It'll save your life. It closes cases and it saves lives, period.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's kind of interesting. There are two things that you said, Andre, that stood out to me. I mean, one, if you weren't taught, that communication is something, like you say, Mike, that closes cases and saves lives, right? And you kind of had to pick it up on your own. What led you to do it when it was almost against the stream?
Well, what led us to do it is because when you become invested in the community that you live in and you police that community, we didn't live in Hyattsville, but we lived in Prince George's County, and we cared about the day-to-day quality of life issues that everybody else did. So growing up, and we grew up in DC and eventually moved to Maryland, but we understand what's going on in these neighborhoods. We understand that these neighborhoods are just filled with all kinds of social issues. And in order to adapt to that, I mean, it's almost like it was second nature to us, and I really didn't have to tell Mike when we were out there, even as on the road together and in investigations for almost 20 years plus as partners. I never really had to tell him, because I knew he knew. It was just a chemistry that we had, that I knew he would know exactly if we stopped somebody or what we were doing something, that I would feed off of him. I would hear what he was saying. We would be able to communicate with anybody out there, because it's just the way, when you care about a community, that you want to make a difference, because that's what you ultimately come in here and sit down and say when you get hired. I want to make a difference. I want to change the community. I want to, have a positive impact on the community. Well, all these things are skills of communication to get those things done successfully, to make that change in the community. And I can say, this is like my 33rd, 34th year in law enforcement. I think that, if I've reached one person through my ability to communicate successfully and change somebody's life, then I think I've definitely done my job when it comes to being a police out here and an investigator. So.
That's a good point, Dre. I also want to add too, a lot of times neighborhoods, so to speak, get labeled as being a bad neighborhood. You may have a higher number of shootings or major crimes in a certain area. Like Andre said, we worked in Landover, Hyattsville, and sometimes you have bad crime there. But you also have people that have been there, elderly people, families that are within that same community. And we owe it to them. It could be a drug war going on. It could be a shootout between two different neighborhoods or whatever. But you have people that live there, families that are there. And you have to go out and do that, because I would always look, my family is from those same type communities. And I would always look at it as, this is my family. They've been victimized. So let's go out and try to do what's right. And like Andre said, we went home. Yeah, we started in DC and, you know, moved along throughout our careers, but it's still our community. And, you know, you can't clean it up totally, but you can do what is right. And a lot of times the community knew that, you know, when we interacted with people, especially by the time we got to homicide and we had really cut our teeth, so to speak, people, you know, we may have worked at homicide back in 2006, 2007, maybe 4 or 5 years later, if the family members or that community knew of another case, they would call us. You know, even cases we weren't working, they would call us up and say, hey, look, I know about such and such, you know, that happened last night. And that was big. That was very big for us.
Yeah. So there was almost, I mean, just a care, you were motivated by a care for the community and doing what was right by them, right? And so you knew that you couldn't just force people to do what you said, that you had to get on the same kind of plane. You had to understand where each other were coming from in order to do your job well, or meet your objective of helping to create a safer community. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you were talking, Andre, you were giving your example. It's like, well, you understood what these guys on Eastern Avenue were going through, right? And so you could kind of leverage that to help you close the case.
Yeah. And you know, sometimes you got to play hardball like that. You know, but it's a respect thing there. You have to be very respectful of their area and what they're doing. I mean, I don't condone any criminal activity one bit at all, but at the same token, you know, I'm not going to be an unrealist here and act like I don't know exactly what's going on there. So, you know, it's a give and take, and it's a respect thing, but it's a communication thing. When you and those people over there understand, you know, what your message is, and obviously your message is conveyed because you're getting a suspect in return. I mean, it's a key. It is a huge key to basically community policing 101 again. I mean, you know, we lack that now. We lack and you hear about it all the time on the news now, that people want to get back to seeing officers out the cars, interacting with people. And I think, you know, in the 30 years that we've seen policing change, we've really gone away from the ability to do that. And it's definitely impacted, obviously negatively, what we see in law enforcement today in the relationships. And that's one of the reasons why we have so many issues we have today. So.
Well, I think also to add to that, Dre, is the community policing aspect that you mentioned is skipping a generation of police officers. So they don't know what it means to be community-oriented policing. They don't know how to get out of the cars and approach people and talk, and, you know, in situations where the police aren't called to a neighborhood, they just ride through the neighborhood anyway and just say hello, meet people, know who these people are. Those might be the people that save your life one day. You may be in a vicious fight, and these neighbors recognize you and have respect for you. They may pull people off of you. You know,
that's right, because it's a generation of police officers that are now, the newer generation of these police officers have been impacted by what some of the generation before them didn't do. And so now you're seeing that lack of communication bleed over and affect policing for this new generation. And now they can't do it because they're fearful of actually getting out the car, being taped, making those contacts positively. You know, it's like, why should I even make these contacts? Because some of those contacts, as we know, aren't going to be pleasant. Sometimes they're just not going to be pleasant. But once you gain the respect of that person, you know, even though they may be involved in some criminal activity, that same person may be the one to help you and pull somebody off of you, or tell somebody who's planning on shooting you, hey, don't do that. Don't do that. He's good. He's a good officer. Don't do that. So, I mean, listen, I've been in situations and fights and stuff where citizens have pulled people off me. And, you know, hey, what can you say besides thank you? So I've obviously done something right to garner some support from some community to help save myself. So I think if everybody would look at it like that, and change themselves, take a minute to get out, take a minute to speak, take a minute to get to know the people in your area, change policing for the whole.
Mhm. Well said. Well said. All right. Well, I think we're at our time limit today, but I want to talk to you guys. I think we should do this more and hear more of your experiences and your stories, because you have such a rich bank of them. So thank you, Andre, and thank you, Mike, for this. And thank you to everyone who's watching. Like, subscribe, do all those things, and we'll see you next week.